Hi, my name is Jonathan Lee, and I will be doing my presentation on community forces, social capital, and education achievement, the case of supplementary education in the Chinese and Korean immigrant communities by Min Zhou and Susan Kim. The key findings in the Zhou and Kim article is that Asian Americans ages 25 to 34 have at least a bachelor's degree, which is more higher, 20 percentage points higher than non Hispanic whites. Uneducated, low skilled, and poor immigrants, refugees, have repeatedly shown up as high school valedictorians and academic decathlon winners, and have enrolled in prestigious colleges and universities in disproportionately large numbers for Asian Americans. The development of ethnic language schools and other private ethnic after school also plays a huge role and creates an advantageous social environment conducive to education for Asian Americans. The cultural argument that is made for the Asian Americans, especially when we're talking about Korean and Chinese immigrants, is that they share a common view, and that stems from the philosophy of Confucianism. Here, I just outlined the basic three fundamental and five moral laws that have dominated the Korean social political life for much of the country's history and influenced the family systems as well as ways of thinking, philosophy, and lifestyles. This is similar to Chinese values as well, but basically, it's a hierarchical relationship. The first bullet we see is the king is the mainstay of the state, the father is mainstay of the son, the husband is the mainstay of the wife. Between father and son, it requires friendship. Between king and courtier, righteousness. Between husband and wife, deference. Between old and young, degree. And between friends, faith. This kind of relationship, this fundamental relationship, is embedded in both the Korean and Chinese experience in a cultural argument. Next is the structural argument that Zhou and Kim makes based on social capital. The ethnic social structures are manifested in various economic, civic, sociocultural, and religious organizations lodged in an ethnic community, as well as in social networks arising from co-ethnic members' participation in them. So in a way, it's sort of looking at the bigger picture and looking at the structural arguments. The history for Korean and Chinese immigrants was that of exclusion. During the 1880s, at the height of xenophobia, Chinese, the first race that was excluded to being in the United States was the Chinese through the Chinese Exclusionary Act of 1882. These kind of discrimination, racism, and prejudicial policies was common against Asian Americans of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean descent and led to ethnic communities being formed with the focus of retaining native culture and language. This is a poster in December in 1906, December 10th, that says "No Japs in our schools," and it was a um, citizens' mass meeting by a mayor named Eugene Schmitz, and this was formed by the Japanese and Korean Exclusion League. I first saw this poster recently when I had a special guest who is the famous grandson of a Korean independence activist, and this was kind of like the historical background that Asian Americans faced when they were in the United States at the turn of the 20th century. So, in the Joe and Kim article, they go into the experiences of Chinese and Korean immigrants. And first, they talk about the Chinese experience, which they faced a long history of immigration to the United States. Since 1965, the Chinese American community has increased more than tenfold from 273,292 in 1960 to more than 1.6 million in 1990 and to nearly 2.9 or 3 million, including nearly half a million mixed race persons in 2000. The importance of Chinese language schools are very important to the Chinese community, and they are non-religious. The Chinese community has a wide variety of, of people from different socioeconomic status, religion, and uh, it does not focus too much on the religious aspect of bringing together the community. Also, they have ethnoburbs, which are Chinese communities that are widely dispersed and not concentrated in single areas. The supplementary education system for the Chinese community is often called a bushiban, and they're basically cram schools where students just study. Um, it could be English or math. It could be sometimes for SAT preparations. The parents also have their network and have their own entertainment while their kids are learning Chinese. So one of the parents called it like going to church on Saturdays. And these parents would often meet with other parents and speak Chinese. And they'll also talk about college education, financial management, and a host of different topics that allow Chinese parents to feel like they're connecting with their community. Los Angeles' Monterey Park is a typical Chinese ethnoburb with its high concentration of immigrant Chinese and Chinese-owned businesses. The Korean experience is one of a short history of immigration to the United States. The Korean experience, really, the immigration history has three waves. The first wave being at the turn of the 20th century. The second wave is that of during the 1950s, when Korean people were coming as spouses of military GIs after the Korean War. You also had the influx of professionals, doctors, lawyers, students who were studying abroad in the United States coming during the second wave. But the third and the largest wave is the contemporary period of family immigration since 1965, following the passage of the Immigration Act of 1965. The author, her 1998 was a book that I've read when I was getting my bilingual credentials at Cal State Northridge, and I was familiar with that Korean American books by her, which I also teach my students when I teach about the Korean American history. The generous family reunification category of this act largely benefited the relatives of three groups of Koreans: wives of American servicemen, Korean students who stayed to find work in the United States after the completion of their education, and professional workers, mostly doctors, nurses, and pharmacists. Uh, the importance of church networks is very important for Korean Americans and for Korean immigrants who just immigrated. It acts as a very important social network. Not knowing anything in the United States, a Korean immigrant would always go to a church to get the information on how to navigate American society. It's something as simple as how to obtain a driver's license, how to um, fill out important documents, and anything on a day to day procedures, administrative forms. They would rely on going to the church and getting the information from church members. The Korean equivalent of the Bushiban is a hagwon, and these hagwon are cram schools, mostly private after school programs designed to supplement public education. It promised students to gain entrance into highly selective colleges. For Koreans, the Sunday school is a way of basically teaching the Korean language. It's called Hangul Hakgyo in Korean, and a lot of the Hangul Hakgyos are Sunday schools where all Koreans, regardless of their income, can learn about their Korean culture and also to learn the Korean language. Um, when nonprofit directors, pastors that they've interviewed in the article, they basically said a lot of the students really aren't interested in learning Korean, but it was just a way of having their Korean culture instilled to them at an early age was the mission and the goal of Sunday school Korean programs. So here I'm just putting up um, the Asian education system, and here it shows the parent with the club forcing the teacher to basically whip the the foreign teacher, and then the foreign teacher is drilling the Korean student to just cram, cram, cram. This is the Korean education system, and I'm sure it's similar to that of China, but the tiger moms and the helicopter parents really just expect their children to be learning as much as they possibly can so that they have a chance of going into a very selective elite school. And this has what later we'll talk about unintended consequences of trying to overeducate your student at such an early age. The commonalities of Chinese and Korean parents, we see the biggest factor being the co-ethnic entrepreneurship. Chinese and Korean ethnic communities are supported by a robust co-ethnic entrepreneurship, the biggest being the ethnic language newspapers, the media. The ethnic media plays an important role in relaying the importance of education in America. So in the Korean community, we have the Korea Times or 한국일보 and the Korea Daily, 중앙일보, and in the Chinese community, there's the China Daily News, which was formerly called the World Journal, the Singtao Daily, and the China Press. Both communities, Chinese and Korean communities, expect to a very high degree of their children to succeed, and the parents will shell out as much as money as they can possibly earn and spend most of it on their children's education so that they have a shot in going to a prestigious four-year college so that they can end up having a prestigious job. They emphasize majoring in fields that will yield the most money, for example, medicine, law, finance, and computer science. These all stem from the concept, what is known as relative functionalism, which we read in the urban context policy class in Dr. Lushai's class. And talking about that history of discrimination for Asian Americans, studying was the only recourse of fighting discrimination, that they have to study harder than their white counterparts so that they can have a shot in their future. So some of the unintended consequences of overstudying, of going to these cram schools at such an early age and being forced to go by your parents, not giving the children the freedom to explore their academic interest or their hobbies, can lead to suicide or affiliating with street gangs. Extreme pressures to succeed in school can lead to these unintended consequences. A lot of children anecdotally often resent going to these hagwons and bushibans and have no choice but to go because the parents forced them to do so. And these hagwons and bushibans are different than Chinese language schools or Korean Sunday schools because these are expensive private programs that parents pay, and usually the middle class income students and their parents can afford to pay for these kind of programs. There is no subsidy or donations for these kind of private programs. Some of the critiques that Joe and Kim mentioned about the supplementary education hagwons and bushibans were that they were exclusionary and elitist. And I agree with this wholeheartedly. It's very exclusionary to non-co-ethnic communities. So if you're not Korean or if you're not Chinese, you won't fit in a hagwon or bushiban. So in Koreatown, you won't see Latino students going into these private programs, supplementary education programs. The access to elite education is also for middle class parents and not for the working class parents. So I believe these supplementary education programs promote the model minority myth. Not all Asians can afford to go to these, what could be $1,000 a month school after school programs, and not it promotes a stereotype that Asian Americans are all rich, that they're all educated, that they're all privileged, and that we're lucky to be the model minority or we're lucky to be Asian, when in fact it's not true. And even in my case, growing up from a single parent family, my mom was working class, often unemployed, and I did not have the means to go to these expensive hagwons. The remedy that Joe and Kim offer is a balanced supplementary education. One of the ways to balance after school services to particularly low income urban communities. The Koreatown Youth and Community Center, for example, is a nonprofit in Koreatown that offers hagwon modeled classes for free. And it's not just for Koreans, but for anyone in the community, including Latinos, African Americans. Another step may be to promote ethnic entrepreneurship in after school education in the form of small business loans for prospective entrepreneurs and vouchers for low income immigrant families. That was a very interesting argument that Joe and Kim laid out. And I someday would love to do something like that as a possible entrepreneur. But they did mention that opening up these kind of startups in urban communities that has a high chance for failure just for economic reasons. My personal experience was slightly different. Although there were many aspects that I could relate, I've never attended a traditional hagwon. Um, Traditionally, hagwons have a secretary at the front desk. She's sort of like the lady with the whip, make sure that every student is paying their tuition, and it has a very for-profit mindset. I went to a different type of quote unquote hagwon because it was a non-profit program called Higher Edge, and Higher Edge advertised the 2007 class was selected from an applicant pool of 92 of the highest achieving public high school students in the Los Angeles area. So, this program um, that I was very fortunate to get into was started by two post college graduate students to attract the brightest students in Los Angeles and basically teach all the things that an after school hagwon would: SAT preparation, college tours, how to write personal statements. And it really was the reason that I was able to get into Georgetown University on a full scholarship, and also get the Gates Millennium Scholarship, which paid all my tuition, even till now, as a student at Claremont. Um, I've received help through the Korean community. The church I attended in high school was called the Oriental Mission Church, and they helped me in small scholarships when, for example, my mother couldn't pay the rent, and I received $1,000 scholarship to pay for the rent through private donations, and it was a way for me to connect with the Korean community. As a Korean bilingual teacher at Toll Middle School and Hoover High School in Glendale Unified School District, I try to give my students the best of both worlds, which is to provide a public education and at the same time give them cultural activities that normally you would get through a hagwon or a Sunday school. I give extra credit for cultural activities, such as if the students go to the Korean festival, I would give them extra credit. I also invite guest speakers to my classroom, Korean Americans who have had civic leadership skills and who are engaged with political affairs. I try to bring them and have them speak about their life experiences. And we also go on field trips that basically just heightens the students' awareness of the Korean culture. The last field trip we went to was the Korean Bell of Friendship in San Pedro about a month ago. So that's my personal experience with uh, the Korean supplementary education system. Uh, the last joke I want to show, it's funny, but it's true. But when I heard this, I thought it was very correct in terms of co-ethnic entrepreneurship. When you get two Japanese people, you form a business. When you get two Chinese people together, you create a restaurant. And when you get two Korean people together, you start a church. I think there is many aspects to the Korean supplementary education systems that urban educators can learn from and also put it into a policy. And for that, I was very happy with this week's reading that I could discuss with you all. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope to hear your comments in our Canvas discussion page. Thank you. Bye-bye.